of the biggest stories from the US and around the world.
Relations between Russia and the West have reached a new low.
Join
The war is an absurdity in the 21st century. The war is evil.
I'm Ben Brown, reporting live from the Ukrainian capital Kyiv, where the UN Secretary General is...
Welcome starts. Well, now we can cross over live to speak to my colleague, Ben Brown.
Yes, hello from Kyiv, the Ukrainian capital. Well, the United States is shocked by what he saw and what he heard. The war here in Ukraine, he said, is evil, and it is an absurdity in the 21st century. Meanwhile, the Russian leader, Vladimir Putin, has warned that countries that try to intervene in Ukrainian fighters. Our correspondent Joe Inwood here in Kyiv has this report.
This is the trip the Ukrainians said should have come first. Borodyanka is thought to be the scene of Russian war crimes.
Buildings. I imagine my family in one of those houses that is now destroyed and black. I see my granddaughters running away, evil.
And it is in Bucha where some of the worst crimes were allegedly committed. Antonio Guterres visited the site of a mass grave found after the Russian withdrawal. This trip is not about finding a solution to the war-made Ukraine. Moscow has cut off gas supplies to 2 EU nations. There are fears of escalation in Transnistria, a pro-Russian breakaway region of Moldova. The Kremlin has even raised the spectre of nuclear war.
Threats for us, threats of a strategic nature. Our retaliation, our counterstrike will be instantaneous.
Over the last few days, there have been a series of fires and explosions inside Russia's borders. It's not been...
It is perfectly right, Ukraine, to use those weapons to defend itself. And part of defending itself in this type of invasion is obviously where Ukraine will go after the supply lines of the Russian army.
Member of Parliament Kira Rudik, thank you very much indeed for being with us. And first of all, can I ask you, we've got the United Nations Secretary General here. He's seeing your President Volodymyr Zelensky today. What do you think his visit can achieve?
And we need right now from the world leaders, from the organizations, it's to make sure that desperate people from the city of Mariupol can get out to life. And for that, we are really thankful to the Secretary General.
There have been many attempts before to get those people out of Mariupol in particular with humanitarian corridors. They just haven't worked so far for one reason or another. Do you think it is possible, though, that the two sides could agree on that?
I'm very skeptical in it. We know that even if, and this is even more outstandingly cruel from their side, because can you imagine gathering all those people, elderly and women with children who haven't eaten for some time and who are in absolute despair? They're getting into the that we are having right now, and all the hopes that we are spreading to the people in Mariupol about that there is a possibility to let them out. And given that we have been in war with Russia for the last 8 years, we also know not to trust them. And we also know that,
you know, countries that intervene in any way in this war here in Ukraine will face retaliation from Russia.
Well, he has been threatening the world, let's face it, for a while right now. My answer to that, yeah, well, you said it. No matter what Putin says, our plan needs to remain the same. Perhaps it should speed up. in this matter.
You mentioned weapons from the West. You are getting more weapons. There was a meeting the other day in Germany, 40 countries agreeing to send more weapons, including
able to push Russians back. So the promises are great, and we have been pushing for that for the last 2 months, but there would be another 2 to 3 weeks before we will see the first weapons from these agreements coming into Ukraine, and then it will be time before we will be able to actually...
The British government want to see Russian troops pushed out of all of Ukraine, by implication including Crimea. Do you welcome that?
Of course, this is what I want too. This is what all Ukrainians want as well. We want to return. This is our aim, and if we have the whole world, all the leaders of the democratic world behind us, I do believe this achievement is possible.
All right, Kira Rudik, Member of Parliament here in Ukraine, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks very much. My colleague there in Kiev, and as Ben was saying, the moment we get any more on that planned meeting between Antonio Guterres and Volodymyr Zelensky, of course, we will bring that to you, a conversation that I think the world is watching. So stay with us on BBC World News for that. They're expected to be hit by the industrial action. The move follows weeks of protests over rising prices and also a worsening of shortages of basic supplies, including things like fuel, even food. Well, our correspondent Archana Shukla gave me the
their discontent. These were employees from private as well as government institutions across sectors of ports, railways, healthcare, education, all of them coming out on the streets to demand that the government step down. Earlier in the day, we met a large group of government servants who were, some of them from the ministries here in Colombo, who had reported sick and came out to participate in this protest. All the protesters who we speak with have just one. A fresh and a new cabinet, a more able one according to the protesters, should take charge at this point in time to deal with the issues at hand. Economic, where the country is facing almost a bankruptcy, they don't have enough cash to
take, but of course the will there's a lot of intense feeling and people are very, very angry to go to these lengths.
Absolutely. You know, the political tug of war is past. The Prime Minister and the President must resign, and the Prime Minister is not in consensus to that. So that's a difficult part to find a solution. On the economic side, where the country actually needs money right now and needs money immediately, term loans, so that they can deal with the crisis at hand. But even that will take a few days to a few weeks to come in. So situation on the ground is still simmering. There is discontent, protesters saying they want solutions and not empty promises.
Archana Shukla there from Impact. Still to come. Are flying cars just a sci-fi fantasy? Well, a Dutch company is working to make them a reality.
खुश है ये आसमां ज़मीन हर तरफ छाए हैं हम ये ऐसी कूल है अपनी कहानी झिल करके जीनी जवानी.
All news is international. So, for in-depth analysis,
The impact on Europe and the rest of the world would be devastating.
and correspondents covering both home and global events, get a deeper understanding and find out what is really going on.
Welcome back. You're watching Impact on BBC World News. Now, as we've been hearing, the UN chief Antonio Guterres has urged Russia to cooperate with the International Criminal Court over alleged war crimes carried out by its forces in Ukraine. Now, he believes that the UN is simply not doing enough to help his country.
Well, I'm generally disappointed about the role of United Nations in this war. And by the way, if an underground hospital was destroyed with dozens dead, wounded soldiers on the Ukrainian part. So the response was there. The disappointment, of course, there is, I am convinced that it was absolutely pointless, because someone who is not interested in peace, someone who can only be forced to peace, gets only encouraged by visits like that. And of course,
have ended up in Poland, and our correspondent Lewis Goodall has been to Warsaw to meet some of those who have been displaced.
Просила би тих, хто входить сюди, приготувати паспорти і думати, що вам потрібно.
Is a pair of shoes, underwear, a bag of pasta.
How many people do you have coming in a day?
From 500 to 800 daily.
500 to 800 daily?
Yeah. Almost each day, our shelves are...
Children, you have much time to ponder how double-edged that miracle is. A miracle which reflects a new powerlessness which now defines you. The fact you're now beholden. The fact you must cue it all.
I think that the next stage of our help will be especially psychological help for those who has no place to return.
No one's ever going to be able to forget, not really, are they? Of rebuilding the self anew is harder. When this war is long over, when the songs have all been sung, it will barely have begun.
Lewis Goodall with that report.
The murder of George Floyd by a white police officer sparked protests around the world. It prompted an investigation into the Minneapolis Police Department, the use of force and other tactics by officers going back a decade. And between 2010 and 2020, 2/3 of all citations for disorderly conduct and obstruction went to people who were black.
The Minnesota Department of Human Rights finds that the city and Minneapolis Police Department engaged.
At times horrific. They made me sick to my stomach and outraged, and I think that our community feels the same way.
The findings, the mayor said, did not come as a surprise to the city's black community.
Here in our daily lives. Well, a Dutch company that makes them has set up a base at Coventry Airport in England. So Phil Mackey went to find out more.
For as long as there have been cars and planes, someone
flight with this vehicle, so it's getting so close.
The PAL V Liberty is made by a Dutch company, which is nearing the end of the long process to get everything licensed and approved. The question is, who's going to buy one? Well, they've already got lots of orders.
If you want to buy one of these, it's going to cost you €300,000. Sounds a lot, but probably a slip if you want to be at the forefront of what they're promising will be a new motoring and aviation revolution.
Hello there. It's all about the heat, isn't it, in Pakistan and India at the moment, as well as Afghanistan, and we could be close to record-breaking levels this weekend. We head to this weekend, we're getting close to around 50 degrees. Closer details though for Friday afternoon. Starting in central parts of Asia, where again it's pretty hot for the time of year. Could see some storms break out across eastern parts of Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, in towards Tajikistan. Monday, we'll see more storms though a bit more widely in Bangladesh, and New Delhi exceptionally hot, 44 degrees on Saturday. Only dropping a little bit into next week.
Since 1933, बरसों से सरसों.
पढ़ता है, खेलता है, झूलता, उछलता है, दौड़ता, कभी-कभी दौड़ कराता है, आगे आगे बढ़ता है इंडिया, अमूल दूध.
Reality check. Get the facts straight.
The global supply chain is under pressure and it's leading to shortages around the world. So what is happening and what could that mean for you?
In India, the shortage of chips caused by pandemic disruption has hit the country's largest car manufacturer, with production plummeting.
The fragility of the global supply chain has been exposed by a combination of factors, and it's being felt across.
Roz Atkins, Outside Source on BBC World News.
Then Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has visited the war-torn Ukrainian towns of Borodyanka, Bucha and Irpin ahead of talks with President Zelensky in Kyiv. Mr. Guterres says he's working on a plan to evacuate hundreds of civilians from Mariupol.
Now on BBC World News, the latest business news from across the globe. World Business Report.
Us recharging without the wait, the Chinese tech firms that could energise the electric car market in Europe. Hello to you, a very warm welcome. This is World Business Report. I'm Ben Thompson. It also failed to give any future forecasts given Elon Musk's pending acquisition. So let's speak to Michelle Fleury, who's in New York for us. Michelle, these figures just out, and they'll give us an indication of what the firm is hoping to do. But as he said, they're not giving
at least in the past, that they were plateauing, they weren't adding any new users. So these latest figures suggest that they are still adding users, and that's why you're seeing this positive reaction from Wall Street. I think the numbers, if I can just read it to you, came in around so great. And I think this is the big question going forward, right, is how is Elon Musk going to improve the service, but at the same time also make money? If he takes the company private, on the one hand, he doesn't have to answer to shareholders, and question mark, we're all trying to wait and find out what he's thinking.
Yeah, the $44 billion question, isn't it, Michelle? Look, while I've got you, let's talk about US GDP. We've just had the latest figures showing a contraction in the first quarter. Just explain what's going on.
Yeah, so the US is on what American consumers are doing, and if they're still going out spending, that's a positive sign. Also, businesses are still investing. So the weakness comes that people are importing more goods than they're exporting, and that businesses are inventories. That's really what's
industries. Now, any potential deal would see Boots expand into India, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East.
Well, Ben, he's very rich. In fact, until a few days ago, he was Asia's richest man and India's richest man. And even now, here and wellness. And that is probably why Mr. Ambani is very interested in Boots.
Yes, and potentially, therefore, that rollout into parts of India and Southeast Asia that it currently doesn't operate.
A really established infrastructure, a network, if you like. Now, lots of global brands have gone into India in recent years, of course, but they've struggled as well. There have been challenges because India's got a really unique customer. It's got a really what the model is in India. It will have to be tweaked because things are different there. The other big challenge is the metropolitan cities, huge cities like Bombay and Delhi. There's a big difference between them and the tier 2, tier 3 cities, the smaller ones. But most of the population is becoming a lot more common. People want it. So perhaps they will really succeed.
To Norway now, and despite its oil wealth, the Scandinavian nation is the biggest adopter of electric cars in Europe. So it's made it
It feels more like a clubhouse or an Apple store, but this is actually a car showroom. Chinese electric car maker NIO is one of the latest brands to enter Norway. Its business model also breaks with convention.
So you buy the car.
Just outside Oslo, this is Europe's first battery swap station.
Just rolling forward into this square.
Power swap has started.
The car is guided inside autonomously.
So I'm not even
be up against other new tech, like faster chargers and longer lasting batteries. A wave of Chinese EVs have now launched in Norway, and others are coming, testing the water for wider European rollouts. Xpeng, Voya.
A lot of new Chinese companies have entered Norway.
The Chinese home market is now the world's biggest for electric cars, but Norway has the most per capita and plans to phase out sales of new diesel and petrol cars elsewhere in Europe too. Adrian Murray, BBC News, Oslo.
You're up to date. There's much more on the website, bbc.com/business. I'm BBC Ben Thompson on Twitter. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Welcome to Click. We're outside again. Sensors to track dangerous hotspots.
The robots are operating like a swarm of bees would.
I'd love to be a cyborg.
It won't be long before we're all living in this bird.
Control things with my brain.
It's like technology telekinesis, isn't it?
The race is on to decarbonise aviation.
Cleaning up the stuff that comes out of those.
BBC World News.
In our connected world, all news is international. So, for in-depth analysis,
the impact on Europe and the rest of the world would be devastating.
And correspondents covering both home and global events, get a deeper understanding and find out what is really going on.
BBC World News America.
With the latest news and results from around the globe. Sport Today.
At the World Snooker Championship, it's semi-final day in Sheffield. Hello and welcome along to the programme. The changes are taking shape at the top of English cricket. Ben Stokes is the new permanent captain of the Test side after Joe Root stepped down.
The man who is now England captain. It's Ben Stokes. And well, he does everything. There was his trial. He was cleared of a fray in 2018 after the brawl in Bristol. There was his monumental innings to beat Australia the following summer.
He was through those completely. He's done the job in bits and pieces. He's done it temporarily before. He's captained the one-day side, and he's looked good doing it. So I think and hope he's ready for it.
Each cricket generation produces a charismatic all-rounder. His hardest work starts now. Joe Wilson, BBC News.
Well, let's get some more on this now. Cricket commentator Alison Mitchell has been telling us what she thinks Stokes will bring to the role.
In terms of the way Stokes will cap by dint of the way he plays and everything that he's achieved. I also think he will be a good people person, a good man manager, if you like, which is another skill because of, if you like, the journey he has had and all the ups and downs in his own career. I think that places him pretty well to try and understand.
Their Europa semi, and West Ham are hoping to make a first major European final in almost 50 years. They're at home against the German side Eintracht Frankfurt. Well, Frankfurt knocked out Barcelona in the quarters, so will be tough opponents for the Hammers, who last got this far in Europe in of the NBA playoffs after beating the Chicago Bulls 116 points to 100 in Milwaukee. It seals a 4-1 series win for the defending champions. They started well and had a healthy first quarter lead, and that set the tone for what became a very...
We did it in game 4, we did it in game 5. Now we're going to a different series, playing a different team, a very, very good team, and hopefully we can do it again.
And after a dip in form towards the end of the regular season, Golden State are now moving up a gear. They're also... We're just a few hours away from the NFL draft, which takes place in Las Vegas this year. Over the course of the next 3 days, the league's 32 teams will pick the next generation of players they hope will change their team's fortunes. As expert Mel Kiper...
For next year, it's going to be fun to watch in this 2022 draft. So like I say, this draft every year, I always say one's better than the other.
Always such an event, isn't it, the NFL draft? Now we've reached the business end at the World Snooker Championship, and Thursday is semi-finals day. The ski 13-12 to set up a mouth-watering semi-final against the favourite Ronnie O'Sullivan. Both players, along with Mark Williams, are the oldest players on the tour and turned professional 30 years ago. Well, Williams, a 3-time winner, is up against the 2019 champion Judge Sport. Now, here's a lesson in how not to celebrate a race finish. This is the first stage of Greece's Tour of Hellas, where Spanish rider Eduard Prades was leading the peloton. It all seemed to be going so well for him until at least he sees the funny side of it. Hey, must have hurt, though, that. One more quick line to bring you before we finish. Spain have been kicked out of next year's Rugby World Cup for fielding an ineligible player in the qualification games. It's the second World Cup tournament in a row that Spain have been thrown out of for the same offence. Get more on...
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Hello there. A cold front is going to be working into parts of South Australia over the next 24 hours. So rain for a time in Adelaide. Cooler weather follows ahead of that from here through Friday afternoon. Some strong winds across the north of Africa from Algeria, Tunisia into Libya could bring some sandstorms here over the next 24 hours. The weather quite settled at the moment for central areas of Europe, but it's still cold in Norway with some snow showers piling.
Of writing. They're just a joyous piece of creative imagining. How many people know who the artist is? I would think possibly a handful at most. I haven't decided she's going to remain anonymous. She's richer because I have been armed throughout with a little card that has let me borrow books for free. Universal entry to libraries, has to have been one of our best ideas, so to see it threatened was a call to action.
Professional filmmakers with a strong personal vision, often making their debut features. This year, one of the highlights has been Happening, a French abortion drama which won the top prize at the Venice Film Festival. Here in New York, it's been getting excellent reviews. But an unwanted pregnancy threatens to rob her of her time at college and freedom. At a time when abortion was illegal in France, Anne ultimately decides to seek out one illegally. Anne is observed in this film.
Questions, the right questions.
Anne is quite independent for her time. She believes in herself and her right to control her body. And she seeks out sex with men just for pleasure. The actress who plays Anne sees her as an
I did to him. I think that, I nourished myself so much with Anne's determination, confidence, braveness, that I became a woman on set. I started the film as a young lady, and I
threatening procedure Anne goes through as she seeks out a backstreet abortion.
I'm very happy that Audrey showed the story and the process of an illegal abortion, how it actually happens. Many young women, many boys and men and women don't know what it's actually about, and I like that it shows reality as it is.
Sticky. There is no doubt that this is a film that is making a strong case for sexual and reproductive freedom. It will not please anti-abortion groups.
From one point to another, radically, but I do believe art open questions, open debates, and that was my point. Never trying to provoke, but always
strong critical acclaim right from the time of its unveiling at the Venice Film Festival last year. The acting, especially from its leading lady, has been the focus of much of the praise. But also credit has gone to the cinematographer for depicting the protagonist's world so effectively, and
what we hope and pray that finally after 40 years the people of Afghanistan will have peace and stability.
My view of feminism is still really
Hello, this is Impact. Unprecedented economic crisis. All of that coming up here on Impact. German parliament has overwhelmingly approved a motion backing the provision of heavy weapons to Ukraine 2 days after the country's government confirmed it was approving a delivery of anti-aircraft tanks, marking a significant shift in its stance. Meanwhile, NATO's Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg has said that Finland and Sweden would be warmly welcomed into the Western military alliance should they decide to join. Well, let's get the latest from my colleague Ben Brown, who is in Kiev.
Well, the United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres is here today. He's been seeing over the last few hours for himself some of the horrors that were inflicted on towns close to the capital. But Putin has warned that countries that try to intervene in this conflict here in Ukraine will face, in his words, military retaliation. Well, the United Nations Secretary-General is going to be meeting Ukraine's President, Volodymyr Zelensky, in talks that are expected to start quite...
Borodyanka is thought to be the scene of Russian war crimes. Much of the city was destroyed by artillery. Over the last few weeks, 41 more bodies have been pulled from this rubble.
When I see those in one of those houses that is now destroyed and black, I see my granddaughters running away in panic. Part of the family eventually killed.
Conflict. No one thinks that is on the table. But there is talk of opening a humanitarian corridor secured by the UN to get people out of the Azovstal steelworks, the last holdout of Ukrainian resistance in the besieged place inside Ukraine. Moscow has cut off gas supplies to 2 EU nations. There are fears of escalation in Transnistria, a pro-Russian breakaway region of Moldova. The Kremlin has even raised the spectre of nuclear war.
to use those weapons to defend itself. And part of defending itself in this type of invasion is obviously where Ukraine will go after the supply lines of the Russian army.
We seem to be reaching a crucial stage in this war, not necessarily on the battlefield, but in diplomatic terms. The rhetoric from all sides has been heating up, and there is now a real risk that this could spiral in a way that nobody can predict. Antonio Guterres will want to do everything he can to avoid that, but it will not be an easy task. Joe Inwood, BBC News, Kyiv.
Well, I'm joined here live now in Kyiv for being with us. And first of all, can I ask you, we've got the United Nations Secretary General here. He's seeing your President, Volodymyr Zelensky, today. What do you think his visit can achieve?
Well, the bare minimum, what it should achieve is can get out to life. And for that, we are really thankful to the Secretary General.
There have been many attempts before to get those people out of Mariupol in particular, with humanitarian corridors. They just haven't worked so far for one reason or...
Right, because can you imagine gathering all those people, elderly and women with children who haven't eaten for some time and who are in absolute despair. They're getting into these buses hoping that they will have a life, and then given that we have been in war with Russia for the last 8 years, we also know not to trust them, and we also know that even if there will be all the agreements, all the negotiations will be okay, there could be just...
countries that intervene in any way in this war here in Ukraine will face retaliation from Russia.
Well, he has been threatening the world, let's face it, for a while right now. My answer to that, more and more sanctions on Russia and making sure that Russia becomes new North Korea, unhandshakable country that nobody wants to deal with, nobody wants to have business with, etc. And no matter what Putin says, our plan needs to remain this. When my people that are fighting, our soldiers, will actually get the weapons and will be able to push Russians back. So the promises are great, and we have been pushing for that for the last 2 months, but there would be another 2 to 3 weeks before we will see the first weapons from this agreement. Sovereign country where we didn't have Russian forces on any of our territories, and this is what we would be fighting for.
But is that realistic, to get Russia out of places that they've held for years, and including Crimea?
This is our aim, and if we have...
Towns northwest of Kyiv, towns that suffered massive damages during Russia's recent offensive there. So our Eastern Europe correspondent Sarah Rainsford has been travelling with Secretary Guterres on this visit. She reports now from the town of Irpin.
Fighting here, Russian troops occupied this area, they occupied other towns close to Kyiv, where the fighting was intense, and the UN Secretary General was here to see with his own eyes what had happened. He also visited the site of a mass grave, the damage here, the destruction, and he said it was important. He urged Russia to cooperate with the international investigation into what happened here. But of course, it's extremely difficult to know how pressure can be brought to bear on Moscow when Vladimir Putin himself met with the UN chief in Moscow this week and denied any responsibility for any of what's happened here. But we've spoken to people in Bucha who've talked about Russian troops shooting dead civilians in the streets. So there is a mounting to go to bring any kind of life back to areas like this, which are absolutely devastated by the fighting.
Sarah Rainsford in Irpin, one of those places absolutely devastated, as Sarah was saying, by the fighting after the Russian invasion.
Creates a threat to European security and promotes instability. Now, he was responding very specifically to comments made by the British Foreign Secretary Liz Truss yesterday, specifically comments in which she urged
with regards especially the UN Secretary General there, who will be meeting Volodymyr Zelensky in Ukraine, having seen so much of the destruction of that country. Much more on Ukraine coming up, but now let's turn to Sri Lanka, because there is a nationwide strike taking place of basic supplies, things like food and fuel. Well, our correspondent Archana Shukla gave me the latest from Colombo.
The protest in Sri Lanka just got bigger because about more than 1,000 trade unions participated in the protest today across the country, and a large congregation walked to this golf face right outside the President's Secretariat to mark their discontent. These were employees from private. Earlier in the day, we met a large group of government servants who were, some of them from the ministries here in Colombo, who had reported sick and came out to participate in this protest. All the protesters who we speak with have just one demand: find a stability, both on economic as well as on the political side. They're demanding that the government currently ruled by the Rajapakshas, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa and his brother, almost a bankruptcy. They don't have enough cash to import essentials, and that's why there are shortages on the ground. Prices are rising for even its basic essentials. And on the political side, where there is this tug of war going on between the opposition.
Fractured supply chains. But might these shocks to our system actually be a catalyst for positive change?
We have to wake up and we have to feed the world. That's a big job.
Can farmers, scientists and innovators overcome these challenges?
Expected to set out the details of this plan in just a few minutes' time. So let's get a taster of what we can expect. We're going to cross over live to Washington to speak to Nomia Iqbal. So we were awaiting President Biden giving us more details. Nomia, what?
Rebuild Ukraine. Now, similar legislation was passed in the House of Representatives recently, but I think what's different about this is just the scale of what he's asking and all the departments that will have to get involved here. So we're talking about the Treasury Department, the Justice Department, the State Department, the Commerce Department as well. Up to Capitol Hill, which was on March the 3rd. He actually got a lot more than he had originally asked for to help with Ukraine. And if you think about the total amount of money we're coming to now in terms of how much the US has spent. So last week there was another area to help Ukraine is coming more than $3 billion.
So we've got the scale of this and the sheer sums, but also we've got the US now openly supporting and helping Ukraine.
It's interesting, isn't it? It's almost because trying to not openly show that they were arming Ukraine, because I guess they didn't want to, they didn't want to give Vladimir Putin an excuse to think that that they were escalating things. But you had Lloyd Austin in Kyiv over the weekend, and their words were really blunt almost. It was like there was almost a clear strategy coming out of the US, where you had Mr. Austin saying that their aim is for Russia to be weakened. So
Washington. And yes, we will continue to monitor that because, like I say, President Biden is expected to give more details on this. Let's turn to India now. A heat wave which has gripped the country for the past weeks is continuing, with warnings that this will get worse. The mercury in the
on my skin. March was the hottest month ever, and April was never this hot. And the worry here in India is that we have May and June coming up, which is a summer season here in India situation, and they're comparing the data with the situation back in 2010 when he said similar situation prevailed. What officials are saying is that over the next 5 days, the heat wave condition will prevail over the past 2 months, and there's a long period of dry spell. And the moisture that traveled from Arabian Sea and that cooled things off earlier, that hasn't happened this year. As far as the impact is concerned, we have had reports of a landfill site / garbage dump, as it's called in India, on fire. Fire tenders were rushed in. The situation is under control. And there was another landfill site in Chennai, which is a city down south in India, another landfill site on fire. So there was...
Out that heat wave, 42 degrees currently, expected to go up to 44. Now to Indonesia, the world's largest producer of palm oil. It's announced a ban on exports of both crude and refined palm oil. Palm oil is the most used cooking oil globally. The Australian consumer watchdog, the ACCC, said that almost half of the 80 online sellers they'd surveyed believed that Amazon's in-house products were being promoted ahead of their own. The internet retail giant has been asked to extend the anniversary of the BBC World Service, and they learnt about how the BBC is maintaining operations across Ukraine, Russia, and also Afghanistan. It's a pleasure to see them.
Hello there. It's all about the heat, isn't it? 40s. And as I said, we head to this weekend. We're getting close to around 50 degrees. Closer details though for Friday afternoon. Starting in central parts of Asia, where again it's pretty hot for the time of year. Could see some storms break out across eastern parts of Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, across parts of central southern Sri Lanka, and some pretty intense storms across northeastern India and Bangladesh, which could cause some flash flooding. Over the next few days, well, temperatures continue to climb. Islamabad up to around 41 degrees by Sunday and Monday.
Get the latest news, results and reaction with our expert analysis. Go online or download the app now.
B-Mark mustard oil.
Make the painting for him. Sorry.
Fluid, dynamic, androgynous, he's now at the forefront of a new generation of progressive choreographers who are drawing new audiences to
Let's look at some of the international reaction. Tell us what you've been hearing. In practical terms, what does that mean? And let's just remind ourselves, this is all part of the same story.
Piece the story together with Ros Atkins, Outside Source on BBC World News.
NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg says Finland and Sweden would be warmly welcomed should they decide to join the Western military alliance in the wake of Russia's military action against Ukraine. An investigation by the US state of Minnesota following the killing of George.
The news.
Welcome to Hard Talk. I'm Stephen Sacker. Workers across much of the industrialised world are being hit by how should employees respond? Well, my guest is Frances O'Grady, the General Secretary of Britain's Trades Union Congress. Whatever happened to the power of organised labour? Over conflict. But right now, would you say that the trade unions are about to take the gloves off when it comes to relations with employers?
Well, I favour workers getting a fair deal, and clearly unions are about trying to negotiate fair pay, health and safety, decent conditions at work and equality. And many times we get good agreements with employers, and that's important. But clearly, if an employer won't compromise...
It does seem that that far outstripped the numbers before the COVID pandemic. Are you now in a new era of conflict?
I think we're seeing an appetite from workers to make sure that their wages at least keep paying. Need action on that front, a windfall tax perhaps on some of those energy companies. I saw the top man at BP saying he had more money than he knew what to do with. Well, I think consumers and workers would like to see some of that come back into their...
That workers see inflation, which I think official figures have at 7% right now, but as you say, could go to 10% by the end of the year. They want their wages to at least try to keep up with that. But I'm just looking at some strikes that have yielded major pay rise.
Organised and more confident about asking for a fair share of the wealth that they produce. You know, the problem is that if pay packets are shrinking, there is less demand in the economy, fewer people spending in local...
The government is imposing a rise in national insurance, which they're going to have to pay on their payroll. They've got massive pressures, and then the workers are coming and say, we want 15, we want 19%. That's just unrealistic, isn't it?
Well, not unrealistic if they come... What we have seen is the longest squeeze on living standards that we've had in 2 centuries. We've already had 10 years of austerity where wages were being frozen at best, cut in real terms. People are looking a very long way from that.
Are we really? Because you said to me, oh, of course, well, you know, our inflationary pressures are nothing to do with rising wages, but actually aren't rising wages in the short to medium term going to exacerbate inflationary pressures? That's sort of how it works.
to the bone, and there simply isn't scope to cut any more. It shouldn't be the case that key workers who got us through the pandemic are visiting food banks, for goodness sake. Something has gone desperately wrong.
So when the Governor of the Bank of England, both companies and workers should show, quote, restraint in pay negotiations, and when asked further whether that meant workers should not ask for big pay rises, Mr. Bailey said broadly, yes, that is right.
Will balance. On the contrary, what we've seen time and time again is that if workers pay the price for all these crises every single time, then that sucks demand out of local economies, and that's not good for
TBI and, of course, the Chancellor Rishi Sunak. I mean, are you saying it was all your idea?
It was certainly a trade union proposition, furlough. It's something that we've done right around the world where we can get agreements from governments, again on that premise that the biggest...
able to take advantage of such a scheme. Furlough basically meant that millions of people were paid a fairly high proportion of their usual wages to sit at home and not go to work, because obviously they couldn't because of the pandemic.
It's supported
to go to work. They were defined as essential workers in one way or another, and they actually bore the brunt of the COVID pandemic.
In so many different ways, and I think this is true of workers around the world, that, you know, whether they were nurses or shop workers or came to the pay round, a real pay cut. I mean, it's simply not sustainable.
Is it your contention then that one of the lessons that we as a society should learn from COVID is that we should rebalance the pay differentials and redefine what
of that crisis? And I think it's only fair that they should be rewarded not with a real pay cut, but with some respect and a proper pay packet so people can afford to bring up their families.
Because it isn't just about what's in the pay packet, it's also all of civil servants, white-collar civil servants working for government in London, whether it's time to require them to go back into the office and no longer work from home. Is it your contention the government has a point when it now says the time has come, all those white-collar workers who can...
Vast divide about who can and can't work from home, but I think there's a lot more that we could be doing to make sure that every job has positive flexibility. For many workers, they want predictability as well of their shifts.
Okay, I just want to be clear.
More important things to be getting on with than interfering in what is, you know, industrial relations between the employer and the union, who come to agreements on hybrid working. And it's not really, frankly, I would have thought he had more.
To give employees a much greater level of flexibility.
I think they're having to wake up to the fact that there are different ambitions, and it's not just women, although it's very often important for women as to whether you can even, you know, have the chance of getting to work, what happens in terms of affordable childcare, the hours you work and where you work from. But I think many young dads in particular that I speak to also want to play a much bigger part in raising their children. And certainly when they are doing driving jobs or warehouse, shift is cancelled at the last moment.
We'll get on to other aspects of the workplace, but just for now, I want to reflect on actually a significant moment for you, because you've announced you're going to be leaving the General Secretary of the TUC job at the end of...
It's about attacking that internationally recognised right to strike.
So is that your way of saying, yes, we are weaker?
Well, the legal framework is certainly tougher, and I think people may ask, why would you want to weaken workers' bargaining? Women have been joining the trade union movement in numbers because they understand that it's only if we join together in a union that we've got a chance of getting
The problem is some
treatment.
people might not believe that. There's one rather symbolic moment just in the last few weeks in the UK.
Law of the land.
Exactly. When the boss was confronted in a parliamentary committee, Peter Hebblethwaite, the boss of P&O, said, there's no doubt we were required to consult with the unions, but we chose not to do that. It was our assessment that this change was of such magnitude that no union... I come back to the point for people watching, what is the point of trade unions today in the current legislative environment in which you have to operate?
It's not the first time we've had a fight, and we don't walk away from a fight when we are faced with such injustice. But it's also with, on the union rate for the job, they've even tried to cut their pay even further. You know, this is the race to the bottom that can only be tackled by governments stepping up.
Francis O'Grady, your words are powerful, but are you not in it anymore? I mean, look at Boris Johnson, Prime Minister. He promised just a couple of years ago he would introduce new legislation to enshrine workers' rights. Well, time after time over the last 2 years, he's just put it back and put it back on the shelf. You've complained, you've said this is...
P&O don't get away with it. That we ban fire and rehire, 0 hours contracts, bogus self-employment, and that we get fair pay agreements. These are political choices that governments around the world can make. Look at President Biden in New York celebrating that breakthrough in Amazon and the right of workers to organise and be treated with dignity. I'd like to see leaders around the world following President Biden's example.
One of your own reports, I believe it was in early 2020, showed that trade union membership amongst young people aged between 20 and 29 is 14.1%. It's fallen by almost half to just
the gig economy.
Which many, to be honest, some young people say suits their lifestyle. And you, as a movement, seem to be so adamant that it doesn't serve the interests of workers. And
I disagree with you.
Maybe some young people aren't so sure.
Look at the...
Some Amazon warehouses are now unionised.
Yep. And we're trying. So we've got members we have to build, because in this country, obviously, you have to get a majority. But we will get there, and that's why I think we take, you know, as a trade union movement, we're helping each other. And I think some of those guys who don't want to see unions invest billions of dollars in union busting, I think their day will come. Their time and unfairness at work, it's got to change.
A final thing I want to get to you with, and it's born out of a fascinating article you wrote actually last year about the power of artificial intelligence and the degree to which, you know, when we look towards the next generation of workers...
Discrimination written in.
Does it, do you think?
Well, I think that's been proven, yes. We've seen it in terms of race and gender discrimination, in terms of facial recognition, accents, you know, huge decisions.
Use the next level of, well, what many call surveillance technology, which looks at exactly how they conduct themselves right through the working day, and even sometimes at home as well. An end to the notion that a worker has any real right to privacy.
And the right to a human review.
We're out of time, unfortunately, but to sum up, it sounds like you may be leaving leadership of the trade union movement in the UK, but the struggle continues.
And I'll always be a trade unionist.
Well,
always.
We have to end there. Francis.
Up, let's start in North America and to eastern Canada and across Maine and the northeast United States. More snow to come over the next 24 hours. Strong winds blowing that around as well. Rain along the coast. We could see some severe storms set up across parts of the plains as we go through into one to end. Southwest stays dry. Pretty chilly across eastern areas of the country at the moment. Now in across Central America, quite a bit of cloud across some eastern parts of Mexico, 1 or 2 showers, a few storms here and there across other areas, but Costa Rica, Panama looking particularly wet, and Spain, Portugal looking dry, brighter and a bit warmer. Those showers moved off into North Africa. We're going to see things turn cooler though across Scandinavia compared to what they have been of late. Adriatic and across Croatia, strong winds could cause some problems over the next few days. Then to Africa itself then for Friday, and more storms through equatorial regions. Democratic Republic of Congo, Rwanda, seen some very lively storms, and parts of Kenya, Tanzania looking particularly wet over the next few days. Eastern South Africa, Afghanistan, Pakistan and India. Temperatures going to rise even further over the next few days, getting close to record April highs. Exceptional heat also accompanied by some poor air quality, especially in the northeast. But here we could see a few showers and thunderstorms. More wet weather to come in Japan for Friday. This is above normal for this stage in April. We'll see some showers and thunderstorms develop here into the weekend. Potential for a decaying storm spreading across Vietnam into Cambodia, southern Laos, so some heavy rain, risk of flash flooding here. Could see some of that as well to the northwest of Australia, and a dry day for much of New Zealand too. Keep up to date with the latest weather stories where you are, of course, on the BBC Weather app and at BBC Weather Online. See you soon.
BBC experts check the facts behind the stories making the headlines. Go to the BBC News website at
Antonio Guterres sees for himself the destruction near to the capital and visits some of the sites of alleged Russian war crimes.
The war is an absurdity in the 21st century. The war is
extremely difficult to know how pressure can be brought to bear on Moscow when Vladimir Putin himself met with the UN chief in Moscow this week and denied any responsibility.
Joe Biden is about to propose using seized assets, and workers stage mass walkouts across Sri Lanka in protest at the financial crisis which is crippling the country's economy.
From the British Foreign Office that a British national has been killed here in Ukraine and a second is currently missing. We know that quite a number of British citizens have volunteered to join the Ukrainian resistance. Spokesman saying that they are supporting both families and urgently seeking more information. We'll bring you more on that as we get it. Well, meanwhile, Ukraine's President Zelensky is meeting the United Nations Secretary General Antonio.
The trip the Ukrainians said should have come first. Borodyanka is thought to be the scene of Russian war crimes. Much of the city was destroyed by artillery. Over the last few weeks, 41 more bodies have been pulled from Bucha, where some of the worst crimes were allegedly committed. Antonio Guterres visited the site of a mass grave found after the Russian withdrawal. This trip is not about finding a solution to the wider conflict. No one thinks that is on the table. By the UN to get people out of the Azovstal steelworks, the last holdout of Ukrainian resistance in the besieged city of Mariupol. But this is increasingly not just a war taking place inside Ukraine. Moscow has cut off gas.
They create threats for us, threats of a strategic nature. Our retaliation, our counterstrike will be instantaneous.
Over the last few days, there have been a series of fires and explosions inside Russia's borders. Spiral in a way that nobody can predict. Antonio Guterres will want to do everything he can to avoid that, but it will not be an easy task. Joe Inwood, BBC News, Kyiv.
Well, as Joe says, the rhetoric. Tell us more about what the president's proposing.
Yes, the US wants to basically expand its financial war against Russia. So at the start of the invasion, the US really did go after oligarchs. It sanctioned many of those. Well, now President Biden is asking for Congress to do a lot more. So one of the main headlines here is, as you mentioned there, he wants the US to have new powers to seize the assets of Russian oligarchs and use those funds to will be something he'll be going to Congress for. And what will be interesting, Ben, is that I imagine there will be a lot of intense wrangling over this. He will need to get the Republicans on support as well, to support as well. At the moment here in the US, you've got an economy that's
very much indeed. Nomi Iqbal there for us in Washington. Let's talk now to Volodymyr Yelchenko, who's the former Ukrainian ambassador to the United Nations between the years 2015 and 2019. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. Zelensky this afternoon, in fact. Do you believe that Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General, can broker any kind of peace between Russia and Ukraine? Is this trip that he made to Moscow and now to Kyiv,
he agrees in principle of the UN participation of the UN and International Committee of the Red Cross participation in the establishing humanitarian corridor from Mariupol. So he never, and again in principle, and we know that diplomatically in principle may mean nothing at all. And I think that even if UN succeeds in organizing some sort of humanitarian, repeated this stupid lecture about Kosovo and how it got independent and about the coup d'etat in Ukraine in 2014, and that Russia has nothing to do of the meetings of Mr. Guterres in Moscow and Kiev is that he proposed his personal mediation efforts sort of between Russia and Ukraine in order to stop the war. So this demining economic reconstruction after the war, but I don't see anything political right now, unfortunately.
Can I also ask you, I mean, President Putin seemed to be stepping up the rhetoric against the West, saying...
Personally, I don't, but nobody knows what is going on in Putin's head. And let me put it this way. Back in 2014, you could imagine that Putin would start, this real war against Ukraine, even a couple of days before the war, even against the...
Vladimir Yelchenko, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to interrupt you. Because we're going to hear now...
Not cheap, but caving to aggression is going to be more costly if we allow it to happen. We either back Ukrainian people as they defend their country, or we stand by as the Russians continue their atrocities and aggression in Ukraine. Improved as quickly as possible. Long before Russia launched its brutal invasion, I made clear how the United States would respond. Predicted they would invade, and they surely did. We said we'd not send U.S. for everybody to see. We're not attacking Russia. We're helping Ukraine defend itself against Russian aggression. And just as Putin chose to launch this brutal invasion, he could make the choice to end this brutal invasion. Russia is the aggressor. Courage is taken to stay in these war zones. The courage is taken to report every single day. I've always had respect for the press, but I can't tell you how much respect I have watching them in these zones. More than 50 million rounds of ammunition. The United States alone has provided 10 anti-armor systems for every Russian tank that is in Ukraine, 10 to 1. We're providing Ukraine significant, timely intel. Last 2 weeks has already gotten to Ukraine, where it can be put to direct use on the battlefield. However, we've almost exhausted what we call, the fancy phrase, the drawdown authority that Congress authorized for Ukrainian military during the critical weeks and months ahead. And it begins the transition to longer-term security assistance that's going to help Ukraine deter and continue to defend against Russian aggression. This assistance would provide even more artillery warriors, and it's going to deliver much-needed humanitarian assistance as well as food, water, medicine, shelter, and other aid to Ukrainians displaced by Russia's war, and provide aid for those seeking refuge in other countries. It typically grows 10% of all the wheat that's shipped around the world. Putin has asserted sanctions are blocking food from Ukraine and Russia getting on the market, the sanctions we've imposed on Russia. Simply not true. Supplemental request will use the Defense Production Act to expand domestic production and the reserve of critical materials like nickel and lithium that have been disrupted by Putin's war in Ukraine, in Alabama, to visit Lockheed Martin plant that manufactures the Javelin anti-tank missile we've been sending to Ukraine, and to thank the American workers, thank them for producing the weapons that help stop Russia's advances in Ukrainian cities. Like, we're going to accommodate them. We're going to seize their yachts, their luxury homes, and other ill-begotten gains of Putin's kleptocracy and the guys who are the and seizure of these properties. And it's going to ensure that when the oligarchs' assets are sold off, funds can be used directly to remedy the harm Russia caused in their help build Ukraine. Additionally, yesterday, a commodity that Russia sells to help meet other countries' needs, but a weapon we use to deploy against those who stand against their aggression. So let me be clear. We will not let Russia intimidate or blackmail their way out of these sanctions. We will our needs to clean energy. In the United States, we're doing that right now. Last year, we developed more solar, wind, and battery storage than any year in our history, enough to power 56 million American homes. Earlier this month is a small price to pay to punish Russian aggression to lessen the risk for future conflicts. Throughout our history, we've learned that when dictators do not pay the price for their aggression, they cause more chaos and engage in more seed in dominating Ukraine. Finally, we're going to continue to deliver critical support to Ukraine. We must also not let our guard down in our fight against COVID-19 at home and abroad. That's why I'm again urging Congress that significant quantities of material we needed ahead of time to get in the front of the line. Without additional funding, we can't pre-order the amount of vaccines we need, and we risk losing our spot in line for vaccines that target multiple variants. The United States won't be able to help stop the spread around the world and close off ongoing sources of the supply chain disruptions. Look, let's get both of these critical tasks done. No delays, no excuses.
I wanted to ask what your message is to Ukrainian refugees on the southwest border and those that are trying to flee Ukraine from the violence.
We have made a direct means by which they can get from Europe, from Ukraine, directly to the United States.
How worried are you by a growing number of Russian comments in the media and on some of their officials painting this conflict as actually already a conflict between NATO, the US, and Russia? And they're painting in very alarmist terms, talking of nuclear weapons.
Because it shows the desperation that Russia is feeling about their abject failure in being able to do what they set out to do in the first instance. And so I think it's more of a reflection, not of the truth. NATO is engaged in taking out Russian troops and tanks, etc. So it's number one, it's an excuse for their failure. But number two, it's also, if they really mean it, it's could come along and say we cannot do that, and that's it.
Mr. President, you say that this is not a proxy war, but Russia clearly disagrees. They say that war means war. So how concerned are you that they may start to act accordingly, even if you disagree?
Divert our sale of the natural gas that we're sending to those countries and divert it directly to Poland and Bulgaria. So that's as much as I can tell you right now.
Sir, how concerned are you?
For future funding. He talked about Moscow's disturbing rhetoric. No one, he said, should be talking about the use of nuclear weapons. It was irresponsible. And there towards the tail, he said, we will not let Russia blackmail and intimidate Europe. Back to Washington and speak to our correspondent, Nomia Iqbal, who was listening to all of that. And Nomia, he also said, and this was absolutely crucial, we're not attacking Russia. We're helping Ukraine defend itself against Russian aggression. And that is very, very important.
Show that America still wants that diplomacy and dialogue to take place to try and end the war. Just to add, Matthew, what President Biden has effectively said today is that America's run out of money in order to help Ukraine, and he has made this request to the pandemic. So this is the request that he's making, but I think what it does show is that America is expanding its financial war on Russia. Mr. Biden said at the start that they are never going to send troops. That was never the plan, but this is the international sanctions. But what Mr. Biden's also said today is that he wants to go after the oligarchs. Just to quote him, he says, these are the bad guys. Previously, we've seen all the sanctions on the oligarchs and seizing their private property. This time is he wants their assets to be so he wants a change in the law effectively, because at the moment the US can only freeze the assets of sanctioned individuals, not seize or liquidate them. But what he's asking is law to go after them. Again, this all has to be approved by Congress. He has to get bipartisan support for it.
Nomia, we will leave it there. Nomia Iqbal there, live for us in Washington. Well, let's get back to the situation in Ukraine. Of course, we know that.
This is one of the sites that the UN Secretary General was brought to today. This is Irpin. It was a residential complex which was targeted, hit in the fighting here. Russian troops occupied this area. They occupied the damage here, the destruction. And he said it was important, he urged Russia to cooperate with the international investigation into what happened here. But of course, it's extremely difficult to know how pressure can be brought to bear on Moscow when Vladimir Putin has houses destroyed, infrastructure in tatters. Some signs, though, of life beginning to return. We saw a market, we've seen people in the streets. We saw, I think, a demining team at work, but obviously a huge amount of work to go to bring any kind of life back.
Today by the UN Secretary General. Well, Mikhail Palinchak is a street photographer based in Kyiv. He joins me live now from the capital, and we're so grateful for your time, Mikhail. Thanks for being with us. As a photojournalist, as a Ukrainian
photographer, I was doing reportage, common life, but situations turned such a way that war came into my country, into my native streets. And
a couple who joined the fight. When did you actually take this picture, and tell me about them?
This picture I took on 25th of February, on the second day of war. It was in Sviatoslav, 21 and 24 years old. They was very happy. I asked them why is they such happy, and then they told me that they just married the day before, armed to defend their country.
And were they involved in actual fighting, in the defending in those early weeks when Russian forces were on the edge of Kyiv? Were they involved in that fighting? Have you been able to keep in contact with them?
Yeah, I have been in contact.
It's of a 17-year-old boy. Just tell me about this picture.
Yeah, it's Vladislav. He's 17. He's just finishing the school. And I took this photo in the basement of primary school in Yagidny village, which is in Chernigiv region of Ukraine. This village was occupied for months by Russian troops who came to this village, and they just basement because of the conditions. From the other side of the door, they put the names of those who was killed by Russians during the occupation of the village. The last note on the door is the 30.
I'm going to put onto the screen another of your pictures where you show a soldier just carrying animals and pets. I suppose that just gives us a glimpse, isn't it, of the ordinary lives that people were living till so recently.
Signed contract with territorial defense. That's how he received his weapon that is shown on the photo. And I made this photo when Russian rocket targeted the civil Ukrainians, doesn't leave those who they love. And this is the most important things for him from his apartment.
Just a final thought, because I've seen a picture of you and your aren't they?
Yeah, we have millions of refugees already. But most men are living in country. Somebody takes arms. We are on the road to the train station, and I send him to the Uzhgorod and then to Poland to his wife, to his mother.
Well, it is so distressing, but your story, the story that is repeated by so, expecting to hear from him and from President Zelensky in the next little while. We'll also talk to John Simpson, our World Affairs editor. All of that here in a moment or two.
Our system actually be a catalyst for positive change.
We have to wake up and we have to feed the world. That's a big job.
Can farmers, scientists and innovators overcome these challenges to protect the future of our food
and stability? My view of feminism is still really the same, which is that I think feminism is fundamentally a justice movement.
Africa will always remain important for me. And so I will continue doing what I do.
Guterres is in Ukraine, seeing damage caused by the Russian invasion ahead of that meeting with President Zelensky. In the last hour, President Biden has promised more support for Ukraine and says any investment in its defence is a small price. He's shocked by what he has seen, but what is the best that we can hope to come out of this visit?
Well, I just don't think that there's any chance that the UN can broker any kind of ceasefire or peace deal at the moment. Too late that he ought to have been in much, much earlier. The Ukrainians are really annoyed with him for not going to Kyiv first before he went to Moscow. But of course, his position depends.
John, interesting comments from the UK Foreign Secretary last night, talking and doubling down on the supply of weapons, just like we heard from Joe Biden a moment ago, but also on Russia needing to actually be pushed out.
The Americans and so on the other. How far does the West go in arming Ukraine? What would happen if Ukraine fires off Western missiles? Liz Truss has been saying very, very firmly that that there must be full as much effort as possible going into arming the Ukrainians. These are not the West's final demands or anything like it. And in fact, Ben Wallace, the British Defence Secretary, said later, well, you know, that it's too soon. The key got the full rules of engagement sorted out entirely.
A final thought about what we just heard from Joe Biden, talking about just the repeated threats we're hearing from Vladimir Putin, describing that sort of talk from Moscow as
Ukraine. How do they stop, for instance, British brimstone missiles going to Ukraine to attack Russian ships in the Black Sea and stop them attacking nuclear war? But it is noticeable that the official spokesman, Peskov, Mr. Putin's main spokesman, Maria Zakharova, who's the foreign ministry spokesman, they're all saying things like...
John, good to talk to you again. John Simpson there, our World Affairs editor. Well, we'll get more from Kyiv in just a moment or two. Let us pause. Let's catch up with the business news of the day. And Ben is here. And what do you have for us?
Yeah, good news and bad news, which, of course, is in the sights of the Tesla boss, Elon Musk. He's offered $44 billion for the firm. Well, in its latest update today, Twitter says it added more users in the first 3 months of the year, but its advertising revenues came in below what was expected.
Base was plateauing, and what these numbers show is that there was still some growth. So they reported 229 million what they call monetizable daily average users. That was 16% higher than the same period a year ago. So that was seen to reveal their targets or set any future goals or give any more indications of what their outlooks is for the future as a result of Elon Musk's planned takeover of the company. So there's still some questions about the long-term performance of this company, but and we haven't seen a contraction like this since before the pandemic. What we have going on here is a couple of factors, which is that underlying all of this data is a fairly strong picture emerging of the US economy. Consumer demand, which is considerably uncertainty about the outlook for the US economy, given the huge cost of living crisis, and that's certainly something that America's central bank is very focused on and something that is concerning the White House.
OK, Michelle, as always, good to see you. Thanks.
To oil and gas and retail, and that's the real growth space. But one missing piece of its puzzle has been healthcare and wellness, and that is probably why Mr. Ambani is very DI rules. So it is easier to do that with an Indian partner and with a really established infrastructure.
Well, Ben, with the latest business news, thanks to you. When we're back, we'll have the latest on Ukraine. We are.
The mustard specialist since 1933. बरसों से सरसों.
खुश है ये आसमां ज़मीन हर तरफ छाए हैं हम ये ऐसी कूल है. जियो
Hello, let's take a look at some of the big world weather stories on the go at the moment, starting with India and Pakistan, where the heatwave continues to intensify. All that on the back of a March, which was the warm throughout April, worsening conditions into the weekend, temperatures getting close to 50 degrees, potentially breaking April records in both countries. Now, the warmth has been contributed by the fact we've had high pressure, clear skies. You can see that on the satellite imagery of the last few days, but it's going to have big impacts on health, infrastructure, and of course, potentially wheat production too. Heat's also been the story for mid-autumn across parts of Paraguay and northern Argentina. Notice how the red colours, the above average temperatures, get squeezed a bit as the blues, the cooler air pushes its areas, and Rio 27. Cold wintry conditions continue across eastern Canada, northeast United States at the moment. More snow to come here as we go through Thursday night into Friday. But then we turn our attention into the plains, the mid and upper plains. Severe storms developing across Nebraska.
What's going through your mind?
It was absolutely amazing.
My heart rate was up. It's part of the game.
This is a really tasty time.
It's one of a kind.
This is Sport Today.
For all the latest results, headlines and analysis, Sport Today on BBC World News.
This is BBC World News. I'm Matthew Emery-Waller. Joe Biden promises to keep helping Ukraine defend
ammunition flowing without interruption to the brave Ukrainian fighters.
Meanwhile, the UN boss Antonio Guterres sees for himself the destruction near Kyiv and visited some of the sites of alleged Russian war crimes.
The war.
Spring heatwave. Hello and welcome to BBC News.
Much of the new equipment we've announced in the past 2 weeks has already gotten to Ukraine, where it can be put to direct use on the battlefield. However, we've almost exhausted what we call, the fancy phrase, the drawdown authority.
Be approved by Congress.
We'll have to see, because this is a huge jump in funds, a huge escalation from how much he asked last time. So $33 billion, I think that's almost 3 times as much as he asked from Congress last in March. And this is for it to go through to September at the end of the fiscal year. So just to break down what that package will include, he wants weapons, he wants ammunition, he wants military assistance, direct economic assistance to Ukraine, humanitarian, food, security.
बीमार्क मस्टर्ड ऑयल मस्टर्ड स्पेशलिस्ट द्वारा बनाया गया करोड़ों द्वारा जांचा परखा आजमाया गया द मस्टर्ड स्पेशलिस्ट सिंस 1933 बरसों से सरसों
शुद्ध दूध में पला
वही स्वाद नया अंदाज अमूल चीज ये मेरा चीज है
Let's turn to our main headlines here. President Biden says Vladimir Putin has failed strategically in Ukraine and says he will ask Congress for more funds to ensure Ukraine's fighters remain supplied with weapons. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres is in Ukraine in a moment or two, but let's turn to what is happening in India, because a heat wave has gripped the country over the last few weeks, and it is continuing with warnings it will get worse. Experts are forecasting a gradual rise in maximum temperatures in most parts of May and June. This year's high temperatures started in March. Our correspondent Vineet Kare is in Delhi and has more.
It is 42 degrees centigrade here in Delhi, and as I stand here, I can feel the heat on my skin. And he said similar situation prevail. What officials are saying is that over the next 5 days, the heat wave condition will prevail in northwest and in central India, and over the next 3 days in eastern areas. This official I spoke to said that the reason behind this is that it hasn't rained over the past 2 months, and there's a long period of dry spell, and the moisture that traveled from Arabian Sea and that cooled things off earlier, that hasn't up. We've had reports of power cuts in states like Maharashtra, where the power consumption has gone up, and we've had reports of a coal shortage as well. In Odisha, which is in eastern India, that's a state, we have had reports of dump, as it's called in India, on fire. Fire tenders were rushed in. The situation is under control. And there was another landfill site in Chennai, which is a city down south in India, another landfill site on fire. So there was not just this worry about the heat.
Follows weeks of protests over rising prices and worsening shortages of basic supplies like fuel and food. Our South Asia regional editor Ambarasan Ethrajan reports now from Colombo.
The slogans against the government were strong and powerful. With the dwindling foreign exchange reserves, the government has banned the imports of several essential items. As a result, prices have escalated, hitting millions hard.
There is no electricity.
Tens of thousands of protesters have come from different parts of Sri Lanka expressing their anger against the government of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. People here say they don't have any faith in the government in handling this economic crisis.
But